Welcome, everybody. My name is Brett, and this is another edition of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis Discord monthly Q&A with John Vervaeke. Thank you, John, for being here.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Brett. Always great to be here.
I'd like to start off actually with a question about about my son. So I have a 14-year-old who's going through his own meaning crisis, so to speak, or his own search for meaning, his own difficulties. How do you feel about introducing your material, whether it's the lecture series or the meditations, uh, to say teenagers, or even young teenagers? How would you adapt? As a parent, would you recommend trying to introduce this material to kids that young?
Well, I've had two kids and I tried and it didn't really take. Um, and I mean, and there's some sort of there's some deep biological reasons for this, right? The frontal lobes are going through their last big growth spurt, and that that project has to get, I think, significantly underway before people can properly process the kind of material that I'm presenting. I'm sorry, I was hesitant because that makes it sound like it's grandiose or something. I'm just saying that there's a degree of abstractness and extended argumentation and critical reflection and self-awareness that are precisely the things that are in tumult and in question from the ages of well, basically around 14 to 20. Those are that's exactly the kind of things that are in question. Um, some cultures able to do it, so I don't think it's they can start a little bit earlier. But I I found that my older son is now turning towards all this stuff very deeply, quite profoundly, in fact. Um, and my younger son is now coming around where he's occasionally reading about Stoicism and things like that, and he's 16. My older son is 25. So I think there's not too much chance of success um, for most of the life of a teenager. Now, of course, I'm speaking in generalities because you're asking me a psychological question. We always have to remember individual differences. There might be particular individuals, particularly gifted or highly motivated in certain ways. But in general, I'm also worried about introducing a lot of significant interventions into cognition while the brain is going through this last big fundamental developmental phase. And there have been concerns voiced by other people about, teaching a lot of these practices early on during such development because we don't know what long-term effects that might have. These practices were developed for people who are basically adults or at least young adults. Um, so there's some caution there, and then there's also just I, given what I know about cognitive development and given what I experienced in my own case, um, yeah, I don't know if there's much you can do right now. Uh, I would certainly introduce people to like you introduce your son to the material, and maybe he is the exception that proves the rule, and that's great. But I wouldn't introduce him to him with the expectations that it's going to catch for him and he's going to take it up in any kind of sustained manner.
Well, thank you. That's helpful. But would you answer the same about the meditation, the mindfulness training? Is that something that you think younger
Again,
teens can
you,
take?
there might be. I was able to teach my younger both my sons earlier on that there's still some I mean, your son is 14. There's some caution. Like I would definitely recommend not teaching mindfulness to children because again, we're not clear about the developmental impact. We know that very good things applied at the wrong stage of development can have deleterious side effects that we can't foresee. Um, so the classic example is we're giving antidepressants to teenagers, and we thought they would behave the same way as adults, and what we did was actually, often in certain cases, we caused increased tendency towards suicide and things like that. So again, if he were to be practicing the mindfulness, you know, 15 to 20 minutes a day and not pursuing it any more deeply than that, and he was genuinely motivated to do that, that's probably okay. But I would definitely not take him very fast through it. I would slow down the pace at which he's going through it.
Great, thank you for that. C. Sepinto has a question that he'd like me to read, or they'd like me to read. As you always emphasize that you are not advocating for irrationality against science when you critique the scientific revolution and its implications in the human thought, I want to do the same before I ask the following question. Do you think there comes a point when certain types of systemic thought or systematic thought become so rigid that it actually starts to be harmful in certain topics? For example, there has been a lot of pro science mathematicians and computer scientists lately and in the past who talk about the mind, consciousness, and metaphysics from the viewpoint of their own field, which I find very irresponsible in some ways. Again, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
bashing these otherwise great scientists, whom I spare from their blushes, but I ask you as a philosopher and a cognitive scientist, do you think I see a real danger here?
I totally and full heartedly agree with your criticism, and I've made it elsewhere publicly. um, there's a reason why I advocate for a cognitive scientific approach to many of these deeper questions. I have given arguments publicly, and I'm willing to still stand by them. But I do not think a single discipline has cognitive, cultural, cognitive, conceptual grammar to, and even ontologies and methodologies to answer the fundamental questions about mind, and especially questions about consciousness. It's presumptuous to think any one of the mind sciences, especially a subfield within one of the mind sciences, is going to be capable of somehow overcoming all the severe limitations that their specialist ontology and methodology placed on them. Now, that is not to say, and I didn't take you to say either, but I want to make clear that I'm not saying, and like I say, I think you're not saying that they shouldn't be doing work and proposing ideas, even some theoretical proposals about consciousness or intelligence. But to do that, we have well established history of doing that um, in a way that's isolated, sometimes a willful kind of arrogant ignorance of what other disciplines are doing on the same topic, and responsively responding to that and trying to incorporate that in. I think that's unjustifiable. I think it's just unjustifiable. We have enough history to tell us that whenever we've done that, that has been mistaken and has not been fruitful. In fact, the opposite. The people whose work was able to bridge across these disciplines often set what I would consider the gold standard for uh, how we should be trying to answer these questions. One of the most egregious versions of this is when people in the sciences make pronouncements about philosophy, often grand pronouncements about how philosophy is useless or should be neglected, which and the performative contradiction, and they are not aware of performative contradictions precisely because they are philosophically ignorant. Performative contradiction there of making such a philosophical statement. How did they determine this about philosophy? Show me the empirical data. Show me the mathematical formal proof. They didn't. They're doing armchair opining, the very thing they think they're criticizing and misunderstanding to be philosophy, in a way that's a performative self-contradiction. So when I find people like, when Hawking's made this proposal, or Neil deGrasse Tyson about, philosophy's dead or it's useless, it's they don't even realize the performative self-contradiction. It's galling, and it's almost pathetic. The and how that kind of the arrogance of the specialist can be so at times hubristic, I think is something that we must continually criticize, because uh, there's a sense of myopia is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy unless it's seriously challenged. And I take the Socratic ideal to be that we always challenge these two things. We always challenge common sense intuition, and we always challenge myopic expertise. Socrates consistently criticized both groups because he wanted to always steer between both of them. And so I would recommend that we try to emulate his practice. That would be my answer to that question. I think it's a great point. I agree with it full-heartedly.
Struan, you have a question for John.
Hi, John.
Hey, Struan.
Yeah, good to hear your voice.
Very good
Okay,
to hear
so yeah, with respect to moreness and suchness, or one of the typical ways that the disagreement between Plato and Aristotle is characterized is that Plato thought that the form inhered in the general, and Aristotle thought it inhered in the particular. And I'm just wondering if that translates over to the language of moreness and suchness, because the way you speak about suchness as being an individual that's beyond categorization, it strikes me very strongly that the category itself is the generalization. And so I was just wondering if there's a valid connection there or not.
There might be. I mean, I'm reading. Hang on a sec, Struan. I just want to get you the correct reference.
Okay.
I'm reading a really good book, Platonism and the Objects of Science by Scott Berman, and I'm only a bit into it, but he makes an argument that, I'm guilty of this as well, is that standard interpretation of the distinction between Aristotle and Plato is actually not borne out by some major text within Aristotle. And Gerson makes a similar argument about how, in the end, Aristotle is much more Platonic than the sort of textbook Aristotelianism. So I think I'm not quite sure if it maps on anymore. I would have probably said yes 2 weeks ago, but right now I'm sort of experiencing a bit of reflective ignorance because I'm aware that there's some very. I mean, he's making a good case already, so I want to follow it out. Yeah. So I'm in a bit of an aporia before your question.
Well, I'm happy to reconsider the position, because I mean, at least the connection between moreness and suchness, the way that I was looking at it, I'm on the right track in that regard, and that's what I'm mainly interested in, because I see that as a potential way of tying together the East and the West, right? Or at least in terms of their various languages. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you. Adeline, you have a question for John.
I do. Sorry, I thought perhaps you would be reading them out loud.
Oh, if people want me to read, I forgot to mention it today. If you want me to read your question, please let me know. Otherwise, I assume that you want to read it. But thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, John. I'm actually one of your former students, so it's really nice to just hear your voice again, too, as people are saying.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to
hear this. Yeah. I actually had a question. I think a lot of the scientific literature, a lot of the conversations around mental health is always talking about sort of the fear response, the fight or flight response, and I don't really come across a lot of literature around sort of cultivating like bravery, courage, and confidence in oneself. And I just thought applying some of the your thoughts on sort of parasitic processing and narcissism, like how does one cultivate more confidence in oneself, especially during a stressful event or before a stressful event? And then throughout life, without falling into the traps of, say, narcissism or self-indulgence.
I think that's excellent. In some ways, this is like a core question, and it's a core question coming out of the Socratic tradition. I mean, you're basically asking for the question around the cultivation of virtue, and what distinguishes the cultivation of virtue from self-indulgence. And I mean, there's a I don't know what to call it, a branch of psychology that does take this question more seriously. It's called positive psychology, and unlike most of psychology takes a pathological framework, and there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But what it does is it studies the mind by how the mind breaks down, because we're typically not allowed to break minds into pieces for very good reasons. So we have to wait for nature, unfortunately, and often tragically, to do that for us. And then we study that. And we also do it for a very noble goal, which is perhaps we can ameliorate the suffering, right? But positive psychology says, well, all that is very good and justifiable. Right? There's properties and powers of the mind that are not revealed until the mind is excellent, until the mind is beyond the norm, beyond the statistical average. And typically the markers of that, the way positive psychology talks about them, some of them are just states like the flow state, things like that. But most often these states and traits of excellence are talked about in terms of virtue. So there is a burgeoning literature around that. Now, unfortunately, the part of positive psychology that has become popular is the stuff around flow and happiness, even though that's not really where a lot of the best work is being done in positive psychology. Like the connections between wisdom, virtue, and meaning in life, I think are some of the more exciting areas that are developing right now. And so I think there's a good literature now emerging about, well, how do you cultivate a virtue, and how do you bring, and so the question you're asking is, how do you bring in self-correction? And I've become increasingly convinced of the Platonic answer. Well, you can't really totally do that on your own. That's why I launched this whole dialectic into the Dialogos project, that you have to cultivate an inner dialogue, which is not the same thing as our ruminative monologue. I mean, we've had people that have sort of poked at this in various ways, like Jung, and you've got a real expansion of it, I think, in the recent work of Schwartz and others around internal family systems therapy, and you've got the whole Stoic tradition of self-examination, exemplified by Marcus Aurelius. But the idea is the internal dialogue and the outer dialogue and the external dialogue have to be put into resonance with each other. There has to be reciprocal opening. You have to have an aspirational project, and there has to be people of whose perspective is other than your own that you have to internalize into your internal dialogue if you want to afford genuine self transcendence and genuine self-correction. And those two mutually depend on each other. And so, and Plato even, I mean, at least in the Republic, I mean, he's got a different thing in the Phaedrus, but he seems to argue that the way we get intra-psychic harmony is directly, there's a direct reciprocal relationship between intra-psychic justice, intra-psychic harmony, and interpersonal, external justice and harmony, and we have to be cultivating them in a mutually reinforcing manner, and that says a lot. That's very consonant with child development and how children self-transcend by internalizing perspectives of the adults around them. So that's a way, I think that's coming to be a sort of a central idea of how we cultivate virtue. And there's increasing criticism, and I'm also I lend my voice to it, of what I call the monolithic mind. Other people call the mono mind. The idea that the mind is a monadic thing. And Plato, of course, criticized that from the very beginning. So I think the way in which we cultivate confidence is also the same way we vouchsafe our practice against self-centeredness and narcissism, which is this resonance between inner and outer dialogos. That's how I would answer that question.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. Velaskin, you have a question for John.
Hi, John. So I've been thinking about, I've just long sort of found it very compelling to think of cognition as at least largely to do with prediction. But obviously there's also this matter of meaning. And I know this is an incredibly broad question to ask, so I'm satisfied with whatever you can say, but I was just wondering what things you can say about the relation between the cognition of meaning and predictive processing.
It's probably my most central, purely academic scientific work I'm engaged in right now. I'm working with Brett Anderson and with Mark Miller, former student of mine and also a student of Andy Clark, and the whole predictive processing. He's published it, he does work in it. Brett's a grad student. approached me, and what we are trying to do right now is to integrate predictive processing with relevance realization theory, updating both in that integration, and trying to go with what's really happening with predictive processing, move away from a largely propositional way of understanding predictive processing more and more increasingly into dynamical system embodied understanding, which would help to put together better relevance realization theory and the predictive processing. And I think if we do that, I think relevance realization, because you've heard me argue elsewhere, especially when it's relevance realization grounded in the idea of embodied cognition, that's at least where you're going to get meaning in life aspects of meaning integrated with predictive processing. So we are working on that paper right now.
Cool. I hope I can catch it when it comes out. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Sorry, I mean, the best I can give you is I take it seriously and promise that we're working on it very hard. And I've been really, it's been really good because some of the best critique of relevance realization theory has come out of this work made by Brett and Mark and myself of my own work, which is a strangely dissatisfying and satisfying thing to do at the same time. Yeah. I'm getting older. This may be my last major sort of scientific endeavor. I hope to keep doing other theoretical work and especially other existentially relevant work. But this could perhaps be my last big theoretical thing. We all think that there's something really good coming out of this, and there's already tendencies towards this, especially in the work of Andy Clark and some other people. So, yeah. I do have one thing. I've been trying to recommend that we replace the word prediction with anticipation in order to emphasize the embodiment aspect, because anticipation combines both prediction and preparation. Because, for example, in Pavlovian conditioning and operant conditioning, you can get a lot by seeing, let's say Pavlovian conditioning. You can see, the NS, the neutral stimulus, is a predictor of the unconditioned stimulus. But you also see that prediction is also embodied in how the organism prepares. So the prediction isn't primarily carried as a purely modeling of the future. It's carried by the way the organism activates particular skills, changes its metabolic rate, etc. And so I think anticipation, which combines the notions of prediction and preparation, is a better term when we move to a more embodied account of predictive processing. That's one recommendation I could make right now.
Yeah, I was, the way I've sort of been playing with it in my head is that if you want to sum it up, cognition is an anticipation process, but then the two components of that are prediction and then kind of valuation, so that it's like those two things make anticipation.
Yeah, and that's sort of the gist of what we're trying to do with integrating relevance realization theory, especially recursive relevance realization theory, with predictive processing models.
All right, thank you. Oystein, you have a question for John.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, John. Nice to hear from you again. I'm the one who I've asked you a lot of questions. So, firstly, I just want to say that there is a theoretical question that or maybe not theoretical, that may not be the right word. But I want to just show my deepest gratitude because I was the one who experienced the derealization. I was the one who experienced mindfulness-induced hallucinations. And
right. Yes.
Yeah, and I also was the one who sort of had a kind of dark night of the soul last time I asked you for help.
Yes.
And
Hope I was able to give you.
Yeah, definitely. The Tai Chi Chuan, like, it worked like a charm. It absolutely, like, it sent me into some serious fireworks. in a positive sense. And
Good. I'm really glad to hear that. Good.
yeah,
Really good.
And I want to show my gratitude that it really felt like, and maybe I actually did put my, how do I say it? It felt like I put my life in your hands in a way, by following your stuff when I felt so lost in the way. And I just want to say that life is, in the literal sense of the word, wonderful right now. And yeah, I never could imagine that things could be this wonderful. So thank you for yeah, I put my I put my life in your hands, and life has become wonderful. So I want to show deep appreciation for that. And also I want to thank you for being as trustworthy as you are, because I've been struggling with the meaning crisis maybe since I was 14, and I never found any wisdom tradition that I could follow, because it wasn't available for me, because it didn't have the science behind it. I think that was the case, at least. So yeah, thank you deeply.
Thank you for saying that. Very humbling for you to say that. I hope that hope you take your life back into your own hands, and I hope that I can consistently aspire to live up to the responsibilities that my work may entail for people's lives. This is a challenging thing for me. I'm a very flawed human being. I don't claim anything else. I try to share my failures as much as my insights with people, and when it's helpful to people, I'm glad. And I want to respect. Human beings should express gratitude. It's important. But and so thank you for saying that. But I hope that my hope is that you more and more come to get those life-saving insights from the path you're on and from yourself than necessarily just from my teaching. That would be my most sincerest hope for you going forward.
Yeah, I hope so as well. And it feels like it is a positive way, where the insights I'm getting from the reading and the Lectio Divina and the mindfulness is yeah, it is working. And I don't want to give you the impression that I well, maybe I do, maybe I do, but I try not to treat you more than a human, and that's sort of why I want to express gratitude as well, because I know you're a human, and that gratitude can help you on your huge work.
Thank you. Yeah. So when you phrase it that way, it's very helpful. It's encouraging. But I like Jordan Hall's slogan. I've sort of adopted it for myself as well. The next Buddha is the Sangha. And so, yeah, I think more and more, I hope you find a community of people that perhaps here on the Discord server that are sharing this pathway to you, sharing this pathway with you and to you. So thank you again, and thank you for encouraging me. Yeah, I do not want to. I don't want to be the focus. I just want to be a voice. So thank you very much.
Sure. All right. The question is, I'm a student at the University of Oslo, and I'm studying psychology.
Sure.
I want to help, and I'm doing my bachelor's degree now, where you're supposed to do a sort of a big task where you're delivering something back to society, and I want to base that on your work.
Wow.
And the question I have is that in Norway we're trying to respond to the meaning crisis, but we're sort of having the same. We're sort of responding with the meaning crisis. With the meaning crisis, so we're the good thing is that we're trying to put back life mastery into schools. That's what we're calling it, sort of life mastery, and that every part of the school curriculum should have life mastery in it. But the bad thing is, at least what I think is the bad thing, after what I've studied of your work, is that there's no systematic sense to this. That every teacher is just doing this.
Yeah.
Are just getting told to just do this. And this. I don't remember the word you use.
It's almost like autodidactic and fragmentary. Yeah.
Yeah. So that I want to base my my task on your work and suggesting that at least the life mastery should be based on our best science and our best cognitive science, and that it should be for developing wisdom. So I'm wondering if you could give me some of your thoughts, since you're the expert here, on how I should go forward with proposing this.
Well, are you aware of any of Thomas Bjorgman's work on the Nordic secret and the whole building movement within Scandinavia? Earlier on, a big thing was around the beginning of the 20th century, because he's basically making an argument and putting a lot of money and time and talent into trying to revise that whole movement. I mean, basically, the network of basically secular monasteries, and that's I think you could make sort of a historical argument showing how successful that was for the Scandinavian countries. Thomas Bjorgman's work on that, I think, is really good. And then I guess maybe the best inroad in is to try and get people aware of connections. Sorry, I'm trying to compress a lot of thought to fewer words. But
Sure.
The work showing the deep. Well, I would argue the deep connections between overcoming self-deception and affording enhanced meaning in life, and how meaning in life is something different than a moral life. It's different from a life of subjective well-being. It's something above and beyond and distinct from those. The work of there's the psychological work, the philosophical work around that, and then that combination of ameliorating self-deception, and the central fact coming out of cognitive science that the very processes that make us intelligently adaptive and adaptively intelligent are the same ones that subject us inevitably to self-deception, then undermine the connections that are so central to meaning in life. That would be sort of those three pillars: the deep connection between how our intelligence work and our proclivity to self-deception, and then how self-deception undermines meaning in life, and that meaning in life is distinct from just morality and from sort of mastery, subjective well-being. That wisdom is exactly that set of practices that has the best potential to simultaneously ameliorate self-deception and afford meaning in life. And if you want to make a huge impact on people's capacity for addressing the issues in what Thomas Bjorgman again calls the meta crisis, you have to get them out of meaning scarcity. And then you could point them to all the literature on scarcity mentality. That's how we would reorganize it. And then there's a lot of science around that, and people could present a unified and integrated curriculum around this that is developmentally progressive. You can't just teach a class on this. You've got to have it woven into people's development across time or across courses. You have to have a pedagogical program And you've got to be training, not just propositional knowledge. You got to be training skills and virtues. You have to be training states of mind, perspectives, and you have to allow them to aspire to transform their very identity, the agent arena relationship. That's what I would say has to be sort of centered on if you want to make this argument. That's what I would argue at least.
All right, thanks. That was great. I will check it out.
Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
Roxy Bine asks, what most recently has awestruck you? And as well, they ask, when will the series of Self be out with Greg?
Greg and Chris. So I answer the second one. First, we've already filmed 4, and so we're trying. We're going to talk to Amar. We're going to try and get the first episode released this Friday. So it's called The Elusive I, the nature and function of the self. So the second one.
Excellent.
Has most recently struck me with awe. Most recently struck me with awe. That's a great question. So I've been, for both theoretical and personal reasons, I've been actually, as I do participant observation, and I've been doing it actually with Chris. I've been doing the internal family systems practice as a way of trying to integrate Socratic dialogue and Platonic psychology with Jungian and post-Jungian practice, because there's various theoretical reasons for that. There's very personal reason. And it was the first time when, in a waking state, when I encountered a part of the psyche that presented itself to me as an archetypal figure. It's never happened to me. It's happened to me in dreams, especially when I went through Jungian therapy. This was the first time, and it happened totally unexpected. It was not something I was trying to cultivate. It gave me a more direct experiential understanding of what some of the practices, theurgia, within the Neoplatonic tradition must have felt like. But basically, I had the figure of Hermes just step into the center of my consciousness, unforeseen and not sought, and present itself that way, almost semi-autonomously to me, and in a kind of an awe-inspiring and also awful way. And then I was impressed by that, but I was also impressed by the way it percolated, not only the way it sort of percolated through my psyche, but the way it sort of permeated through my experience. Because as I was walking around, I don't mean this in any literal sense, but you sort of see, the pattern external to you. And I'm not talking about synchronicity. I'm talking about you see, you see what it is that the symbol of Hermes, right, is plugging into in the world. Not only you see Hermes, their archetypal figures, transjectively. They're simultaneously plugging into the depths of the psyche and disclosing patterns of the world that you hadn't seen before. And so that was also quite. There was moments of that that were like spine tingling for me to get that sense, and it was interesting about how that deep to deep experience kept reverberating through me. And of course, I'm trying to understand it. I'm trying to. I mean, I'm doing it. I'm doing this practice, like I said, on my own and with somebody else for existential and therapeutic reasons, which I won't disclose because they're not relevant to people in general. But it also has huge sort of theoretical and not just theoretical, but theoria. It has huge sort of contemplative and theoretical dimensions to it that are also really part of the awe of it. And all of this is sort of unfolding in a way that's semi-incoherent, but also self-organizing. And I'm participating in it, but I'm also following along with it. And so that's the most recent one, and it's still sort of reverberating through me right now. And talking about it sort of brings it up.
That's awesome. Alex.
Nice fun.
Alex Signora asks, do you hold that knowing is necessarily linked to consciousness? If yes, What are the implications for non-motivated, non-conscious activities like sleepwalking that seem to be recruiting motor functions? Could these activities be properly called applications of procedural knowing? Or, if consciousness is not necessary for knowing, what would be the distinction between knowledge and mere information?
That's a good question. I mean, that's a philosophically fraught question because it has to do with this ongoing debate between the internalist and externalist definitions of knowledge. I don't want to presume on people by sort of going into that at length. So, the question is whether or not we. So I happen. Let's try it the other way. I happen to think there's good reason and good evidence and robust evidence for implicit learning, which is learning that does not require our focal awareness or our egocentric deliberate effort, and that we're often unaware of how we're picking up complex patterns. And that's Hogarth's argument about where intuition comes from, and I think that's a bang-on argument. The question is, can we pick up implicit patterns, and can we pick them up in a way that allows us to do pattern detection, pattern completion, pattern projection in reliable fashion? And I think the answer to that is yes. I think a lot of skills are acquired that way. But there's like, the problem is consciousness seems to have a fundamental role to play when we're confronting novel, complex, ill-defined situations. So it's hard to answer your question because I think I almost want to say, if it's going to be anything, a really sophisticated skill, then there maybe has to be conscious awareness, at least initially. But is there the possibility of knowing that is... so we're putting aside propositional knowing because that requires something like justification or at least virtuous acquisition and application. If you want to do the internalist thing, justified true belief, and if it's externalist, it has to be reliable, etc., etc. I'm really intrigued by this question of, is it possible to pick up sort of low-grade skills that are nevertheless reliable, and that don't require a conscious awareness? And I think that's the case. I think it's possible for us to acquire things in a completely implicit fashion that reliably coupled to the world and therefore count as procedural knowing. You can hear all the hesitancy in my voice because like there's a lot of things that are sort of hovering around this. I do think a lot of the processes by which we know ourselves as a self are not acquired consciously. They're not practiced consciously. Like it looks like, and this is why Reber originally did the work, how we pick up on all of the ways in which we learn a language, because I know English. I think it's reasonable to say I know English. Do I have any conscious awareness of learning it or any of the principles that are at work? No. But am I reliably capable of exercising it? Yes. Was I given a big boost, by as Chomsky suggests, by a lot of powerful innate biological machinery? Yes. Was I given a lot of boost by a lot of cultural machinery, the way Tomasello says? Yes. But nevertheless, I have a skill I once did not have. It's reliable, it's powerful, it's complex, and I don't think it was acquired through conscious experience. Now you might say, well, doesn't the baby have to be conscious? Yeah, but that's not the same thing as saying the baby is conscious of the language in order to learn it. It's really tricky. It's really tricky. That's my best answer. I'm sorry. I wish I could be clearer about that, but it's hanging right on this really interesting gray area of a question. I really congratulate that question. It's a really good question.
Great. Vin, you have a question for John. Vin, if you're talking, we're not getting your audio. So maybe, I think we're not getting your audio, Vin, so I'm going to go on the next one, but maybe, Vin, you can write out your question, and then I can read it out, and just put that in event text. Solid, you have a question. Or actually, Solid wants me to ask. What do you see as the main difference between the West and the East's metaphysics, and what could be bridging them?
I agree with Nishitani. I think the main difference between the West and the East metaphysics is the capacity to deal with nothingness, and that the East has a notion of real possibility that allows them to wrestle with no thingness in a non-nihilistic fashion. I think the way that we could bridge between them, some of the work that's going on, but work like people like Alicia Uraro, who are trying to bring back a revised version of Aristotle's notion of formal causation as something in which we can talk about real possibility as potentiality, as real potentiality in terms of structural functional organization, dynamical, dynamical self-organization, etc. And so I think dynamical systems theory has the potential to revive the Aristotelian framework, but also challenge Aristotle's privileging of actuality over potentiality, and integrate with the Eastern philosophy's understanding of that dynamic of self-organization as one in which potentiality takes priority, and the Eastern dynamics that does that best is Taoism. Taoism is the religion philosophy of dynamic patterns of self-organization that is ultimately grounded in the priority of potentiality over actuality. We talk about the cup, but it is the emptiness inside that makes the cup useful, as the Tao Te Ching says. I'm paraphrasing, but there's that theme run throughout, and so I think that's what I see, and the person who taught me this is Nishitani. That's what I see. The main difference and the way of potentially bridging them is a critical revival of Aristotle's notion, critical in the sense that we're revising it and we're putting it into dynamical systems theory, but we're also making an ontological shift and giving at least equal weight, if not priority, to real potentiality over actuality. And that would be interesting, because that would even bring some significant challenge to one big branch of process theology and philosophy, because Whitehead takes the forms. He's the guy who said all of philosophy is a footnote to Plato. He takes them as real, but he has an argument for the existence of God that's based on an axiomatic metaphysical principle he has, that actuality takes priority over potentiality. And that is getting harder and harder to reconcile with both relativity and quantum mechanics, that actuality has an ontological privilege over potentiality. So I think our metaphysics is driving us towards the revision that's being suggested, and then that could act as a significant bridging between the East and the West.
Right, and I think Vin has now fixed their mic, so Vin, can you try again? Maybe not. Maybe. Yeah, I'm sorry, Vin. We're not getting you. So maybe it'll have to wait till next time. You're flickering a bit, but we're just not hearing you. So sorry about that. Cliff, you have a question for John.
Yes, thank you. Hello, John.
Hey, Cliff.
It's an honor to be speaking with you. Now,
Thank
yeah, it's fair warning. It's a bit longer, although I'll try to be concise for our purposes. Now, and it's a bit late for me. I'm a bit exhausted now. What's the bulk? I need to set up a bit before asking my question.
Sure.
Essentially, I have, so from my context, right, I've been practicing virtue ethics for 5, 6 years, I believe, of the Stoic tradition, right?
I was going to ask who was more Aristotelian or Stoic. Thank you for telling me.
In many ways, um, everything that I've been doing is coincidentally relevant to many things which you have been providing, contributing to the science community and to everyone else so far. I have recently been introduced to your Meaning Crisis series, your meditation series, your wisdom cultivation series. I have been going through all of this over the last, I don't know, few months.
Hope it's helpful to you.
Now, thank you. I wanted to talk about that. Now, what's going on is I have influence over a few people. I have I have I have a little stoa of mine, of my own. Although it's not, I'm not really, the entitled head of my own stoa with my own philosophical concepts and my no. It's more egalitarian in that sense.
Right.
People, what's going on is I have formed, or rather, I contribute strongly to a few communities, both on the internet and in reality, locally, right?
Mm.
From a position of uh, a well-respected sage figure. Although this is very arrogant of me to say, I don't see myself as a sage. But people, yeah. But people come to me, right? I have cultivated the sorts of right character and eudaimonia, which is um, something entirely synchronous with everything that you understand is living meaningfully, you know. And this is before I encountered your education and everything more or less that you have posted on YouTube has I have tried to integrate into my practice, and I have taught more or less. I teach actually more or less on demand to other people whenever they have a problem I can identify that can be resolved using your methods, right?
Wow.
But there's a problem. There's multiple problems actually, and I hope you can help me in this, right? Um, so I'm going to be and these people, they can just be normal people or even academics. You know, in philosophy, academia, they don't actually cover Socrates and Aristotle
Yeah,
and
I'm
religion.
well aware of that. Yeah.
It sucks actually. I'm gonna tell you, it's miserable actually. Um, so I'm gonna be teaching virtue ethics to undergraduates and graduates, and sometimes even guys with master's degrees, because they have no idea what's going on. They only have a meager understanding of all of this stuff, which is profoundly important to living a good human life, right?
Mm.
Um, I have a position of responsibility towards people in general, but
Yeah.
in
I know.
reality, yeah, as someone who is perceived to be wise. Um,
Gee. Oh, that's
yeah,
hard responsibility.
it's yeah. I have to, so it's very it's you often talk about this. You
Mm.
have to maintain humility. You have to realize
Yeah.
you can never be above the process of wisdom cultivation. But what's the bulk of my question now? Um, I have failed in a few ways. First, I don't have control over the sorts of I can't produce a sort of community by myself as you would ideally conceive of it. I can't, even though people listen to me, they're not going to listen to when I propose that they bind in a certain manner and perform certain rituals. Because, I don't know, I give them the means to become. You know how Stoics have this? They're capable of maintaining a wisdom cultivation process, irrespective of their external circumstances, regardless of their social position. Well, in that sense, how do I'm teaching them how to do everything I've done manually by themselves, but without a community. And this is something you stress very often, community.
Yeah.
Yeah. I although most of my meaning problems um I have resolved so far, but suffering is more of a problem that I have encountered over the course of my life. So that's why I've been inclined more towards Stoicism as a means of enduring suffering and right character, although this is a bit beside the point. My question is, since and aside from this, my real work is programming. I mean,
Right.
it has nothing to do with. I mean, I'm going to spend uh, 12 hours in a day cultivating wisdom and 12 hours in a day coding, right? So it's gonna be it's I don't I'm fine, but I my question is, now that you know all of this, um say maybe in a few years I might have the option to make some profound changes about what I do with people. Where do I push people to alleviate their meaning problems and their suffering problems in a way which would be respectful towards everything I've learned from you and everything, I've learned by myself. I've cultivated, I've practiced, where now that you know all this, and so I'm going to be finishing your series. I'm going to continue teaching people how to live good human lives. And I teach myself this even beside community. But say, if, now that you know all this, if I, in a period of time, gain an option, maybe what do I do? I mean, when I gain this power, to affect the material circumstances in a profoundly significant manner. What do you think I should be doing in my position with respect to that you know now and everything that you know about my circumstances? Should I don't know, should I abandon my studies, my careerism? Should I join a Zen temple? Should I join a Stoic fellowship? Should I This is the bulk of my question.
Wow. I don't know. I don't know how to. I gotta reflect on this for a moment. There's a
Yeah,
lot.
yeah. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I, there's a couple of things that sort of stood out for me, which is issue of suffering, and the issue of community building. These are two that I'm very much interested in as well. I mean, one of the criticisms I have of Stoicism, which I'll bring out in the After Socrates series, is that there's a lot that's going on there that's very powerful, but they took for granted a lot of the attachment relations that, and I mean it in the scientific sense, not in the Buddhist sense, that build persons and build communities, and so that needs to be more properly integrated.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, there's things. So I'm trying to put together this program, and Chris and I have an anthology out. This pedagogical program, and you got a bit of it in the wisdom cultivation of how you can move people from through sets of practices where you move them into dialectic, into dialogos.
Yeah.
Because I think that's, and I'm doing a lot of participant observation in this and trying to figure out how to integrate that Socratic tradition. Antisthenes talked about what he learned from Socrates was how to basically dialogue with himself, and that's started the whole tradition. The dialogical aspects of Stoicism have fallen into a lot of underemphasis, and I think we need people who could really participate in reviving those, and that's why philosophical fellowship and dialectic into dialogos and what Guy Senstock, my friend, calls circling 2.0. I think these are things that have to be brought in to bring in that the dialogical element and the social building element. And the other thing is, you sound to me, I don't want to make any pronouncements on your career because I don't know your situation. I don't, right? But it sounds to me like you are ripe for training to be a philosophical counselor and to get training in philosophical counseling and get legitimate certification, and because that would go towards how do you more effectively and responsibly translate the Stoic stuff into the alleviation of suffering of others. And there's such a tight connection between practices like philosophical fellowship and philosophical counseling. I'm seriously considering getting that at some point. So I mean, I'm sorry. I'm trying my best. You gave me a lot, and I'm just trying to pick up on a couple threads where I think I could make some recommendations that I see sort of jiving with where you're coming from. So that's what I would say right now.
Yeah. Thank you, John. I'm gonna think about that.
Yeah, and this doesn't have to. This isn't a closed conversation. Come back and ask more.
Next, I'm gonna be here next time. We can, if it's gonna be, if there's gonna be an opportunity, I think we can develop on this next time I come here. But I appreciate it, John. But there's just one problem I'd like to focus on, right? Yes, I could be going down this path of philosophical counseling was recommended to me before. But like you said, Stoics, I mean, I do borrow from the Epicureans. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm not.
You should.
I borrow from everyone. There's a bit of, so you have taught me, although not directly through that YouTube stuff. You have taught me meditation. You have taught me Tai Chi Chuan. You have taught me a bit of everything, and I've picked up on this. And now I have to pick and choose to optimize, right, within my environment, what is, and my own essential nature, right? I have to seek out the optimal balance between all those practices, all that cultivation, all this,
and how that, and I try to make it clear that it would be presumptuous for me to tell you I can give sort of design principles and some pedagogical programs, but how that's going to work out, it's got to be that ultimately has to unfold, for you, in community with other people. Perhaps the Discord server here would be a good place for you to do that exploration with people of good faith.
Yeah, this is a good place. This is a good place.
And John, I know you have to leave, so I want to be respectful of your time. So Clip, maybe you can pick up with this next time.
I'm gonna. Sure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, John, and thank you, everyone, for the great questions. And John, as always, for your wisdom and insight. And we just appreciate it so much. And we know how busy you are. And thank you for spending some of your very valuable time with us.
Thank you, Cliff. It was a pleasure to meet you, and thank you. It's always great to.
It's an honor, John.
Thank you, and thanks everybody again. I always feel very welcome here.
Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, take good care, everyone. Have a good evening. I do need to jump. Take care. Bye bye.
Have a great
Bye.
night.